Lady Deborah Chambers QC posed the question this morning in the Herald: where have Kiwis' rights gone after emergency legislation was decreed by the government during the COVID-19 pandemic? And she is with us to discuss this column this morning. Welcome, Deborah. For those who don't know her, she's a leading trust and litigation relationship property lawyer in New Zealand. She has litigation experience, including frequent appearances in the Family Court, and the High Court, and the Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court, you name it. Lady Deborah, welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell me, what was the motivation for this column that you've written this morning?
Well, I do think lawyers have a role, a constitutional role, and one of those roles is to stand up for people against government action. And I just got to the point, and I was an MIQ when I wrote this because I had time to do it, ironically. I just got to the point where I decided someone has to say something here, because the Bill of Rights, which does guarantee our freedom of movement and right to come in and out of the country as New Zealanders, is just not entering the discussion. And it seems to me that now that the facts have changed and we're dealing with a much milder form of this virus, the government is breaching its obligations under the Bill of Rights in terms of protecting our rights, our fundamental rights to freedom of movement and the ability to go in and out of New Zealand.
Because they can't justify it. You're saying because the variant is so much milder, the justification isn't there, therefore the right of the government to impinge on the Bill of Rights, it doesn't exist.
That's exactly right. So how our legislation works is it sets out a series of rights, and one of them is the one I'm talking about. And then it says under Section 5, these rights are subject only to such reasonable limits as can reasonably and be demonstrated and justified in a free and democratic society. And my point is that given how low the risk is now of dying of this disease, given the 95% 2 shots campaign, and given the fact that New Zealanders are doing social distancing, etc., and are careful, you can no longer justify the extent of the control on our freedom of movement by this government. And I just really feel that someone needs to say, well, where are you looking at New Zealanders' rights, fundamental rights, which are guaranteed under the Bill of Rights, and where is that discussion, and why isn't it happening?
What about the mandates and other restrictions that the government has imposed, albeit for health reasons? Obviously that's the justification. Where does that leave those in terms of the Bill of Rights?
Mandates are more complicated. So what the right you have under the Bill of Rights is the right not to have medical treatment that you do not consent to. And the argument is that the government has not breached that because, of course, if you choose not to have the vaccine, you don't have to have the vaccine. The only argument against that is to say, well, is that really a choice, given that you lose your job and you can't go out to certain places or go on planes, etc., and you're having your freedom of movement restricted? But that argument has been run in the courts and has been lost. And you can see it's a more complex argument because, of course, the person standing in the court floor has not been vaccinated, has said, I choose not to be vaccinated. And the government says, well, that's your choice, but these are your consequences. So that is a more difficult issue, whereas this freedom of movement issue, which after all affects 95% of us, because that's the issue that's controlling our lives, is...
We might have lost Lady Deborah there.
Dear.
Lady Deborah Chambers, the government would have cut her off, wouldn't they?
Fascinating, though. So interesting.
It is, isn't it? And she raises a good point. Why is it that we're not talking about this more? Which is why, when we saw it in the Herald this morning, we thought, goodness me, we haven't heard that kind of perspective in recent memory anyway, particularly as it relates to MIQ. So very interesting to hear from Deb there, from Deborah Chambers QC.